Okay, so today I want to discuss something very important, and I think this is the most important question right now in the global economy. What happens if Saudi Arabia actually ends the petrodollar deal tomorrow? Okay, so right now, as we speak, there are rumors coming out of Riyadh that the Saudis have been in secret talks with China, with Russia, with India, and with Brazil. And the rumor is this: Saudi Arabia is preparing to accept yuan, rupees, and rubles for oil instead of only US dollars. Now, the mainstream media is not really talking about this because they don't want to panic anyone. But let me read you something. The Wall Street Journal published a small piece last week buried on page A12, saying that the Saudi finance minister met with the Chinese central bank governor for 5 hours. 5 hours. You don't meet for 5 hours to talk about the weather. And then 2 days ago, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund announced it is selling $30 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds. $30 billion. That is not a small adjustment. That is a signal. So here's the thing. When a country starts quietly selling your debt and meeting with your biggest rival, it usually means they are already planning to leave your system. If they were staying, they wouldn't need to do any of this, right? So that tells you a lot about the situation already. And at the same time, and this is really important, the Chinese foreign minister came out and announced what he calls the multipolar reserve system. He says, and I quote, "The world no longer needs one currency to rule them all. The future is a basket of currencies. Digital yuan, gold, and regional settlement systems." So you're thinking, wait, America already has $39 trillion in debt. It already relies on the world buying its bonds. And now its closest ally in the Middle East is talking to China. Why is Saudi Arabia doing this right now? People say, oh, the Saudis are just negotiating for a better deal. They're just posturing. They would never actually leave the dollar because they need American protection. And today I want to argue the opposite. I want to argue that Saudi Arabia has already decided to leave and that there is a very specific timeline. And once you understand it, everything China and Russia are doing starts to make sense, okay? But first, let's talk about what the petrodollar actually is, because most people don't understand how fragile it really is. So let me show you how this system works, okay? Since 1973, every barrel of oil sold internationally has been priced in US dollars. Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states agreed to this deal. In return, America gave them military protection, weapons, and a security umbrella against Iran and internal revolts. This created a closed loop. The world needs oil. To buy oil, the world needs dollars. To get dollars, the world sells stuff to America or borrows dollars from American banks. Then the Gulf states take those oil dollars and invest them back into U.S. Treasury bonds. That is what funds the American debt. The entire $39 trillion Ponzi scheme, and it is a Ponzi scheme, depends on that loop. If the loop breaks, America cannot borrow money anymore. Interest rates explode, the government shuts down, the stock market crashes. So the petrodollar is not just an economic agreement. It is the single structural pillar holding up the American empire. Now, here is what most people miss. Saudi Arabia has been preparing for the end of this deal for at least 10 years. Not 1 year, not 2 years, 10 years. They have been building a refinery complex in Yanbu that can process oil and sell it directly to China without ever touching a U.S. bank. They have been training their sovereign wealth fund managers in Beijing and Shanghai. They have been stockpiling gold, physical gold, not paper gold. And just last month, they joined the BRICS New Development Bank. These are not small signals. These are the preparations you make before you announce a divorce. And now, let me tell you about 3 signals that tell us the announcement is coming very soon. First, the Chinese digital yuan pilot program just expanded to include cross-border oil settlements with Iran and Venezuela. That system is already live. It is already working. Second, the French government, yes, France, just completed its first oil purchase in yuan from the UAE. The French are not known for taking risks with their currency. If France is doing it, the system is already moving. Third, and this is a bit strange, the number of shipping containers leaving the port of Shanghai labeled gold has tripled in the last 6 months. You cannot move that much gold without it being connected to a new monetary system. So something is being prepared, okay? So let's use game theory. Let's ask, if Saudi Arabia actually announces tomorrow that it will accept yuan for oil, what happens? Let me walk you through it step by step. Step 1, the announcement happens. The Saudi oil minister stands up and says, starting next month, 20% of our oil sales will be settled in yuan, and within 2 years, we aim for 50%. The immediate reaction is panic. Every central bank in Asia and Europe realizes that their dollar reserves are now less useful. They start quietly selling dollars and buying yuan, gold, and other assets. The dollar drops 15% against a basket of currencies in the first week. Not gradually, in 1 week. Step 2, the U.S. Treasury bond market freezes. Remember, the Gulf states hold about $700 billion in U.S. Treasuries. If they start selling those bonds to get yuan to buy their own oil, who buys them? Japan? Japan is already the largest holder. They are not going to double down on a sinking ship. China? China is the one leading the charge against the dollar. Europe? Europe has its own problems. So there is no buyer. The Federal Reserve is forced to step in and buy those bonds itself, which is effectively printing money to finance the government. That triggers hyperinflation. Not 5% inflation, not 10% inflation. We are talking 30%, 40%, 50% inflation within months. Step 3, the American military protection deal collapses. This is the part most people don't think about. The petrodollar is not just about money. It is about the fact that the U.S. Navy protects the Strait of Hormuz for free. If Saudi Arabia leaves the dollar, why would America continue to protect Saudi oil shipments? They wouldn't. So the U.S. withdraws its carrier groups. And then what happens? Iran, which has been waiting for this moment for 25 years, immediately starts threatening Saudi tankers. The Houthis in Yemen escalate. The Strait of Hormuz becomes a war zone. Oil prices spike to $200 a barrel, just like we talked about last time. But this time, there is no American security umbrella to calm the markets. So the spike is permanent. Step 4, the global economy fractures into currency blocks. The dollar block shrinks to just the United States and a few small allies like Israel and maybe the UK. The yuan block grows to include China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and most of Southeast Asia. The euro bloc tries to stay neutral but ends up leaning toward China because Europe needs oil. And the rest of the world, Africa, Latin America, South Asia, they get caught in the middle. They have to choose. And here is the key insight. America cannot win a currency war against China when China has all the oil and all the manufacturing. America makes iPhones? No, China makes iPhones. America makes cars? No, China makes more cars. America makes semiconductors, Taiwan makes the best ones, and Taiwan is right next to China. So America's only real export is dollars. And if nobody wants dollars anymore, America has nothing. So now I want to do something fun. I want to put on my thinking cap, okay? Because you're probably thinking this is all a disaster for America. Biden is weak. The Fed is incompetent. China is eating our lunch. But what if, and stay with me here, what if the American elite actually wants this to happen? What if they have been planning for the end of the petrodollar for years? And what if they are deliberately letting it collapse so that they can replace it with something they control even more tightly? I know this sounds crazy, but let's use game theory. Let's follow the logic, okay? So look at this. When the petrodollar collapses, when the global financial system fractures, who benefits? The world still needs a reserve currency. It still needs a way to settle trade. It doesn't just disappear. It has to be replaced by something. And what is the only thing that America still controls absolutely? Not oil, not manufacturing, not even its own debt. The only thing America still controls is the global payment messaging system, SWIFT, and the military bases that surround every major shipping lane. So here is the play. Let the petrodollar die. Let the yuan rise. Let the world think they have won. And then, when the chaos is at its peak, when Europe is freezing and Asia is fighting over tankers, America announces the new system, the digital dollar, a blockchain-based, programmable, centrally controlled currency that every country must use if they want to ship goods through the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Gibraltar, or the Strait of Malacca, because America still controls the choke points. America still has the Navy. So the New Deal is not sell oil in dollars or we won't protect you. The New Deal is use our digital dollar or your ships don't move. This is not my idea. This is the exact strategy laid out in a 2019 Rand Corporation paper called The Future of Global Reserve Currencies. I read it. It's real. And the authors explicitly say, and I quote, "A controlled collapse of the existing dollar system could be advantageous if replaced by a US-led digital currency framework with enforceable compliance mechanisms." So, is the end of the petrodollar a disaster for America, or is it the necessary destruction of the old house so that a new, more controlled house can be built? I'll let you decide. Okay, now let me be very clear about what happens if Saudi Arabia actually says no tomorrow. Scenario 1, the dollar collapses slowly over 2 to 3 years. The Federal Reserve prints money to buy bonds. Inflation runs at 30%. The stock market loses half its value. The average American loses their retirement savings. But, and here's the twist, the digital dollar is rolled out. The military enforces its use. And America becomes a surveillance-based economy where every transaction is tracked and every dollar is programmed. You cannot send money to someone the government doesn't like. You cannot buy things from countries the government has sanctioned. It is the end of financial freedom, but it is the beginning of a new kind of American control. Scenario 2, the dollar collapses fast. Within 6 months, hyperinflation hits. The government defaults on its debt. The military's paychecks become worthless. The social contract breaks down. States start issuing their own currencies. California, Texas, New York, they all go their own way. The American empire fractures into regional blocks. And in that chaos, China steps in and becomes the world's reserve currency by default. Either way, the old petrodollar order ends. Either way, ordinary people lose. Either way, the wealthy and the connected have already moved their money into gold, into Bitcoin, into foreign real estate. They will be fine. You and me, we pay the price. So let me summarize what we learned today, because there's a lot. Point 1. Saudi Arabia is very likely preparing to end the petrodollar deal. The signals are all there. Selling treasuries, meeting with China, building alternative payment systems. Point 2. If the announcement happens, the immediate effects are a crashing dollar, a freezing treasury market, hyperinflation, and the loss of American military protection in the Gulf. Point 3. But, and this is the key insight, the American elite may actually want a controlled collapse so they can replace the old dollar with a new digital dollar that gives them even more control over global trade and surveillance. Point 4. This is not a random accident. Rand Corporation, the Fed, the Pentagon, they have all been gaming this out for years. The petrodollar was always going to end. The only question is what comes next. Point 5. The real question is not whether Saudi Arabia leaves. The real question is who pays the price for the transition. And the answer is ordinary people. Americans who wake up to find their savings worth half as much as Pakistanis and Egyptians who can't afford bread because oil and fertilizer prices exploded. Europeans who freeze in the winter because they can't pay for LNG. That is the tragedy of currency wars. It is always the ordinary people who pay, and it is always the powerful who benefit, okay? So that is my analysis for today. This is not prophecy. This is game theory. This is structural history. I want you to think about this, question it, look at the evidence yourself. And remember, the most important thing is not to accept what I'm saying. The most important thing is to develop your own framework for understanding how the world works.